I feel as if there's a moat in front of me. So I have a few prepared remarks, and then my intent is to wander and to have each of you ask questions as it relates to your own research, and hopefully by being able to respond to each of you individually, we'll also have a general sense of what's going on. I know many of you are in programs where the journal is ultimately the highest form of publishing, but others of you may have ambitions at some point to consider the book. There are many parallels between the two, a lot of overlap, but anyway, I just wanted to let you know that this is not just about books, this is about publishing in general. Research initiatives, work-life balance, time management, and other things. So if you'll let me prepare my remarks, give you a little bit of background on who I am, and then we'll be able to adjust this accordingly to your needs. So I guess I should start by saying greetings in a big roll tide. You have no idea what a pleasure it is for me to be spending this time with you. I absolutely love graduate school myself, and I thank the graduate school for continuing the second year now of my being able to advise you here. You may not know that this semester marks the 7th year that I've been coming to campus on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences. I am here 4 times a year, twice a semester, work here a full week, engaged in one-on-one sessions with faculty. Occasionally we do group sessions within departments, and there have been occasions where we've also done group sessions for any faculty who wish to come. So this means that I'm seeing a wide range of faculty, from biology to criminal justice to history, American studies, and the fine arts. And it's wonderful to be able to see the respective research initiatives, writing and publishing projects that the faculty are engaged in, and also to be able to advise as a doctor perhaps would in an individual office on matters that relate to the ongoing efforts to be more efficient, more productive in an environment that demands it. You are the future, and that's very important. And so it's wonderful that I am given the opportunity to speak with graduate students, because a good bit of the information that I'll be providing you is not as universally known as you might believe. Very few universities and colleges around the United States provide this service to faculty or graduate students. Most faculty are told to figure things out on their own in terms of how the publishing world operates. And I've said this for years, this is like having hospitals with lots of talented nurses and doctors but no surgeons. Because faculty are evaluated primarily on their teaching and their research, but there's no one on campus to advise them. So this is really a unique opportunity for me to do this here, and I've been doing this now for 7 years at other institutions, from Texas to Connecticut. Back to the university. Once again, it's showing great leadership in thinking about what it is that you all might need now and in the future as you contemplate your future as to how you wish to develop your own research. When I meet with a faculty member for the first time, whether it's an assistant professor or someone who has been here for a while, I always like to know more about who you are. There's often a small world that emerges. Where were you born and raised? What did you do in terms of your school and work before coming here? by finding these small world connections, you realize that how lucky we are to be assembled in a research institution such as this. So let me tell you a little bit more about my background as if I were interviewing myself. For in many ways, I'm in my 35th year now in the publishing world. I have seen the publishing world change from the typewriter age to the digital age. In fact, when I started my career at the Johns Hopkins University Press in 1984, we had only one computer for 100 employees. The director of the press had to reserve the computer for 15 minutes because we were all sharing it. We had one photocopying machine. A really, really busy week were a few dozen phone calls and a few dozen letters because all communication was done by phone and US mail. Imagine that. You probably get the same in a few hours, if not a day. So no wonder we have so little free time. My dad and mom actually met and married here. So I'm a third generation Crimson Tider, and like Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, I have brought along my Coke bottle just to make sure that everyone's very much at home. My mom was from Chattanooga, and she majored in music education. In fact, when I was this tall, I remember going into Dr. Kleino's office, who was the chair of music education and a founder of the School of Music, and remember wandering around the hall. So it's been a long time since I've been back in this building, but it doesn't look all that different, although a little different from a youngster looking up at adults. She played in the viola in the symphony. She was a soloist in many operas, and she played the glockenspiel in the $1 Million Band. And many of you may not know what a glockenspiel is because the glockenspiel doesn't exist in the 400-member band today. But if you'll look at the patch on the side of the Crimson Tide band members on a game day, you'll see the logo is actually superimposed on the glockenspiel. My dad was from Connecticut. He studied economics, political science, and lettered in tennis. He was lettered in the class of 1953. He was also in the Air Force, ROTC. So after graduation in 1953, he served as a lieutenant. And after leaving T-Town, we lived briefly in Omaha, though I was still in my mother's womb, and then moved to Denver, where I was born. So I'm a native of Colorado, though I was raised in my dad's hometown in Connecticut after he returned from service in Korea. So the point that I want to make is people have been coming to the university from all over the nation and from all over the world for a long, long time. After 2 years at the University of Pennsylvania, where I lettered in ice hockey, I transferred here to Alabama, and as I said, graduated in the second class of New College in '77. So you can see perhaps why I'm so fond of coming back and speaking with you today, because this is of all my alma maters, Penn, Alabama, Wisconsin, Madison, where I did my graduate school. This is home. It was here at Alabama where I got the first taste of really what I could become, though of course I had no clue what that would be at the time. It was here in New College where I learned that I could be responsible for creating my own path forward. And I've been told I am the first and still only undergraduate to have earned the equivalent of an MFA in creative writing as an undergraduate. And I was the first to develop 2 minors, Asian Studies, which now is an official minor, and Early Childhood Education. So try to figure that out. Asian Studies, Early Childhood Education, and creative writing. But I could do it here. It was also here where I got my first taste of the publishing world, because I was fortunate to have been here when the Black Warrior Review was founded. by George Thompson, not related, but we from time to time still correspond. And so I was a contributing editor to the selection of poems in the inaugural issues of the Black Warrior Review, which is still one of the nation's most prestigious literary magazines, still run by students. Then, during graduate school in Madison at the University of Wisconsin, I was given another opportunity to be part of another startup journal, a research journal for the University of Wisconsin Press, when I, as a graduate student, became the first book review editor and first assistant editor and eventually a co-editor of the initial volumes. That is still the first and only scholarly journal of its kind with a focus on on land management, design, and planning. So the reason I'm spending this much time to give you a sense of who I am and my early adult years is because each of you has your own unique story as to what brought you here. This is where you're going to grow. This is where you're going to be nurtured. You're occasionally going to stumble. You're going to be challenged to excel in ways perhaps you did not know, and move forward with your respective career, whatever that might be. Whether it's an academic ambition that you have or private practice in business. Each of you comes with a particular sense of place. You're from Valdosta, Georgia, or Houston, Texas, or Greene County, or Benghazi, or Gwangju. You come from many places, but you're here because you want to be here. We all come here for a reason, a quest ultimately for lifelong learning, a desire for personal enlightenment, for improvement, for the ability to discover and advance one's talents, and the desire to make your own path in the world. That drives us. It brings us to this room today. So as I say, what I would like to do is to provide an overview to the navigating the publishing process. And in the past, this is where I like to get off the podium, which I will soon do, and open it up to questions. Last year when I opened it up for questions, there was radio silence, so I continued on. Some of you may have other obligations. So what I would like to do is to initiate that process, and otherwise I can go on for a long, long while. So let me do that and see if anyone would like to open up with their questions, and then we'll take it from there. Does anyone have any questions that you came to the building? Okay, we have a tradition, 2 years in a row, no questions, but they'll emerge. Recently, I've had the chance to read many research articles scheduled for publication in research journals. And there was one thing that all of these journals had in common, and these are journals that are being, articles that are being written by faculty. And that is, I had to ask every faculty member questions about their article because I was not getting that information in the article themselves. What do I mean by that? There was a lot of assumed knowledge that I was going to be able to intuit what was not being shared either in the text proper or through the notes. And so one thing that I noted immediately was that all of these articles that I read were going to end up being heavily revised before they would be acceptable for journals. So what does that actually mean? All right, let me pull back. If each of you were a first-year assistant professor here at the university, I would be asking you to do the following. And so this is some advice that you might wish to take advantage of. Considering where you are today and where you're going to be in 3 to 5 years, identify all of the journals, where your articles might find a home. You may have already done this. It may only be 3, it may be 13. Do not restrict the number of journals that might serve as a home. Become familiar, intimately familiar, with the articles that have been prepared in the last year or two. Because as you probably are aware of, the editors of journals is a professional service. These are not professional publishers who are running these journals. These are faculty members from around the country and the world who are providing professional service. But you'll also get a sense of the kinds of articles that may be directed. Very often, there are websites associated with each journal, so you can do Excel sheets or the equivalent thereof to get information on word length, for example. Expected time for turnaround on having the peer review conducted. The ability to use tables, charts, other illustrations, and any restrictions there may be thereof. So I'm going to give you not hypotheticals, but examples of what you as students and you as young faculty may incur. What I'm asking you to do is, after you get familiar with those journals that may be homes for you, I am asking you to contact the editors of those journals directly. And I'm asking you to do so to the extent that it's permissible, not to use email, but to use department letterhead and an envelope and a stamp. And I mentioned this last year, but it's worthwhile mentioning again. 3 years ago, someone asked me what a stamp is. Now, what is the reason for making contact with the editors of specific journals? The reason is to separate you from the hundreds, if not thousands, of other young scholars and faculty who are trying to bark up the same tree. And as I will say to each of you, for those who are coming to my individual sessions, you cannot assume what the editors want until you actually have some sense of contact with them and or with those who may have published with them. So for example, there are going to be 3 or 4 of these, but perhaps you can jump into the driver's seat and assume your own world. Many journals will have a word limit of approximately 5,000 words, for example. Other journals may be 10,000 words, but this is the purpose of getting an Excel sheet and seeing what's possible. And as you spend the time, a couple of hours in Gorgas will do it, you will find that there is strict adherence in some journals to that word length. There's no deviation. In others, you may see occasional deviation. So what are you supposed to do? Guess? Guessing will get you into an immediate revise and resubmit to the point where it could be burdensome. So you have a 7,000 word article, and I understand that some of you, especially in the sciences, perhaps are not sole authors of the articles that you're working in tandem with the research lab and your mentors, but nonetheless, taking ownership of it is the point here. You have an article that's 7,000 words. So coming back to this reference to a strict adherence to 5,000 words, is that article dead on arrival? How are you going to find out unless you contact the editor and explain what's going on? Or you may see that every so often there is a variation, so there is precedent, there is context, therefore, for being comfortable, say, with submitting a 7,000 word article. Okay, that's one example. Another example. Many of these journal articles are formulaic in the way they are structured. Some may have an introductory section that is historical in nature, or this is where one applies the theoretical construct under which your research questions or initiatives are being undertaken. And if you have a certain word limit, let's just say that it's taking you about 1,000 words to provide that introductory material, historical or theoretical. And I'll come back to this in a minute. As you are soliciting advice from mentors and peers as to whether that introductory material is in good shape, let's use the number 3 advisors because it provides a simple example. 2 of the 3 mentors say the introduction is perfect length at 1,000 words, but the 3rd says you need a bit more or you need a little bit less. What are you going to do? Or all 3 are harmonious. It's right on the mark, or it's too much, or it's too little. What I'm suggesting is, rather than guessing, you can contact the journal editor and explain to them the situation that you find yourself in the following ways. You submit the article that has a 1,000-word introduction, but you know in the back of your mind that one of your 3 mentors wants more or less. So when you send it in, you inform in a transparent way that you're submitting it in, knowing that one of your mentors is suggesting enhancement or a reduction. And you ask the journal editor to be so kind as to have his or her, and I know that doesn't cover all genders today, but I hope you'll forgive me if I can keep it to a his/her phenomenon, to pay a special attention to that particular aspect of the work. Or you may have received 3 comments from your mentors asking for an enhancement. So when you submit this article in, you inform the journal editor and the potential peer reviewers that in listening to your mentors, you have increased the length, but if the readers want it to be reduced, you'll be happy to send in the original. There are multiple variations of this, but this is ultimately about quality, to be sure, but it's also about saving time. It's also about mitigating the chances that the kind of revisions that will be called for are lessened. Because the one thing you need to realize, this is less so in the book world, it's almost without exception in the journal world. When a scholar is asked to peer review a journal article, they feel compelled to find something wrong with that article. So that's why I say if you enhance the introduction, chances are the readers are going to say reduce it. So that gives you some options in that regard. But it also, by asking the journal editor to share your thoughts with potential peer reviewers, it's asking the peer reviewers to take ownership of your article in ways that they may not have previously done, but it also focuses the attention on those areas of an article that you yourself would prefer to receive greatest guidance. Another example are in the concluding remarks of a journal. Again, you're going to have to rely on your own reconnaissance and interrogation of these previous journals to see what is traditional. But in many cases, the conclusions are simply wrap-ups. This is what I said I was going to do, this is what I have done, and we're off we're going to shut down the door. But remember, there's context for your research questions. Why is it that the cancer rates are disproportionately high in certain environments and associated with certain socioeconomic groups? You're going to forget that? There are possibilities in a conclusion to do more than a wrap-up. There are opportunities, for example, to suggest the need for further research. There may actually be opportunities for you to suggest initiatives that would affect policy, public awareness. Again, not assume what might be needed, but you can have these conversations with journal editors in advance, or at the time of submission say that I have written this traditional conclusion, but I'm very much open to the possibility of advancing ideas about new research or new opportunities for public policy or whatever it might be. Now, this is not traditional. And 7 years ago, when I started this for the College of Arts and Sciences, there were more than a few chairs who thought I was a little bit off kilter. But what we have found in having this kind of communication on the part of a young faculty especially, is they're saving time. To save 6 months' time is the equivalent of it feels like 6 years. It does you no good. It does the journal editor no good to review materials and have you go right back to the beginning, just like it was Candyland, the child's game, where you think you're almost going to win and you pull a card and all of a sudden you're back to where you started. Now, that does not mean that the reviews that you may receive are not worth the effort, but what we're trying to avoid are outright desk rejections that oftentimes are taking weeks, occasionally months. It's not something that's coming in right away. And it also allows one to interact more fully with creating something that would be meaningful and special for publication in that particular journal. Now, I have thrown an awful lot at you, so I am going to pause and ask, are there any questions at this point? Otherwise, I'll keep going. Have any of you? I'm sorry, I'm going to start in the back, if you don't mind.
So here's a question for you. Some of us are in fields where the journal article is the coin of the realm. And in others, we look at the book, the monograph, or journal articles. So how should we be thinking about our work? Is there a strategy for those of us who could publish journal articles or go for that monograph? Should we be thinking about one over the other? Is there a way of managing both at the same time? What would your advice be to somebody?
That's where I was going next if I didn't get any questions. So let me answer a few others if you don't mind, because they were more of a technical nature.
I just wanted to know, is there ever a time where it would be appropriate to email the editor, or should it always be?
Initially, I'm suggesting an introduction by way of a letter, and I should have continued the thought. I'm sorry, I'm not used to lecturing, so I apologize for that. The purpose of the letter is to let the journal editor know that you are in a position to say it will be an honor to serve as an occasional peer reviewer for that journal in the following research areas for which you are qualified. Now I'm going to anticipate a question. Okay, I'm not yet I'm engaged in the PhD. I'm still a candidate. There are so many journals in so many fields that journal editors are, for the right reasons, occasionally soliciting the advice of PhD candidates in certain fields. So your rank at this point does not disincline an editor from considering it. There are going to be occasions where that may be a problem, and in the book world, it's not possible. It's also to establish the relationship for the questions that we went through, but you may also find out the following, that there's going to be a special issue for which your research would be appropriate. You may also be able to get to know this person well enough where he or she may serve as a reference for you in a grant application or for a job application. You may also find out that there, unfortunately, a similar topic is coming out in a forthcoming issue. This is not a really good time. So it's a short and sweet, and then it's a follow-up. And you can be humorous. This is not a job application. You can simply say, you know, I don't mean to shock you by writing you a personal letter, but I'm trying to separate myself from the hundreds of other people at this particular point. You can start it out and just saying, even in my career as a graduate student, I rely heavily. I read every issue the minute it comes in. And how can I contribute? At your point in your career, it's acceptable, in my view, to take on a book review because that is adding to your resume. And the goal, of course, of all of you is to get your resume to the point where you will be competitive in the marketplace, whatever position it is that you would want to apply for. Does that help a little bit? Then it's going to be email. But I would also say that when I really want to get something done, I want to talk to someone by phone. And I'm going to get into time management in a minute, but let me just proceed. Yes?
May I pick up on one of your points as someone who's
A distinguished former faculty member, by the way.
Yeah, in psychology and I was on some editorial board, regular reviewer. I had some students who were just crackerjack, dynamite, and they would do a shadow review. I would do my review, they would do their review, and ultimately I would tell the editor, is it okay for you to accept this additional reviewer's submission?
Well, see,
and then they did just what you said. They then were allowed to, on their own, start reviewing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, while they were still in the program.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you know, you guys might find out who your mentor, your senior faculty, who are reviewing things. Can I look over your shoulder? Can I write a review and see how it compares to yours?
Because remember, too, that the journal editors are senior faculty. They are also trying to give you the experience of becoming a scholar or a researcher, regardless of what your long-range plans may be in that regard. Sir, did you have a question behind?
Yeah, he has another question.
Okay, all right. So you can accomplish in a 10-minute phone call what might take 10 emails and days. So whenever I really want to accomplish something, I ask to set up a day and time to talk by phone because it allows one to have immediate interaction and back and forth. So I'm just going to give you a preview of what I hope to end with on time management. The average student and faculty member is on email an average of 4 to 6 hours a day now. These are statistics. I worked for the National Science Foundation and the Association of American Geographers, now American Association of Geographers, for 5 years. I finally rotated out. And this was a very unique program in the United States. It was a week-long event for first-year faculty in departments of geography and 15 first-time chairs. And this was a complete immersion into what it was going to take, regardless of whether one was hired in a community college, a state university with 3 classes, or a university such as this, where it's 2 with ambitions for, I doubt this will ever be an R1. I just don't see how it's possible, but an R1 and a half, if you get the drift. So I've lost my train of thought on that one. Yeah, I'm trying to reframe it for you. So it used to be that it was 20 to 25 hours a week, and this is true of all professions worldwide. It's not unique to the academy, but the email is on all day long, and it's the least important thing you do in life is email. And I was immersed in the statistics. 80% of all email is a complete and utter waste of time. Today, it's 30 to 34 hours. In the last 2 years, I've been tracking social media. It's 4 to 8 hours. That's a 40-hour work week on email and social media before you really do any work. Fact. Now, I am finding, especially in faculty and even in some administrators, that they're pulling back and aware of this. Perhaps you're not, but I'm going to give you an example of something that I've used consistently for 7 years. So you're all faculty members in a department, and you all teach at 11 in the morning, and you have a weekly faculty meeting at 10, and it's a miracle. It's over at 10:20. How many of you are going back to your office and turning on email? Except for one person, it's been 100% raising your email. And I said, you just lost 40 minutes of valuable time. Because the statistics have worsened in this regard. 5 years ago, when you would hit the send button and you think, oh, I got a lot done, I'm just busy as all get out, I'm getting the work out, 80% would respond to the email within 24 hours. It's now 2 hours. So for all of those people who are going back to their offices, you included, going on email, writing an email, by the time you get back at 12:15 or 11:50, about 80% of those emails will be right back in your inbox where you thought you had gotten a lot of work done. The phone avoids a good bit of this. So I might as well finish the technique while I'm here, because some of you may have to leave. There's one technique that saves everyone in this room, faculty included, a minimum of 15 hours a week. And that is respond to email once a day. Chairs would be fired for doing this, so chairs are exempt. For the reasons I just stated, how many of you are going home 5, 6, 10 times a day and checking your mailbox, and upon opening a bill, immediately writing a check? Use your own analogy. But what happens is if you look in the morning, and this morning I always look, especially when I'm on campus, I always have to look at email before I leave campus, because there are oft times a situation. This morning, for example, a grad student could not get, he was doing research in New Orleans, and he was not going to get back on campus in time to get parked and make the appointment. So we had a phone conversation, a 45-minute phone conversation. He was in Mississippi at a rest area. Okay. You get the point. So in the morning, you just check and see what's in front of you. There may be a colleague who's ill and you have to cover, or there may be something special. All you're doing is deleting and looking to see what's come in. And you probably would want to do it at lunch for the same reason, especially those of you who are parents. You checking in to make sure your daughter or son is okay, or you have to pick up at daycare or what have you. The key is, the scientists suggest that you wait until the end of the day when you're most tired. This is one of the exceptions, to do email, preferably before you go home. And by doing that, by having that email off, you're saving 4 to 6 hours. Because when you add up all those 5, 10, 20, 30-minute intervals when you're on email, and you add it all up, that's how you get to 30 plus hours a week. So what happens is, in a Monday through Friday regime, on average, you're going to save about 5. Because even if you're waiting till the end of the day to be responsible and responding to email, it's on average a 30 to 45-minute task just to render the responses. Now, 2 thoughts. It's okay to kick the can. Got your email. I'll be in touch with you next week. You don't have to respond fully today. In fact, in some cases, that would be quite high risk. I can't tell you personally how many times I get an important question, say from an author, and if I responded immediately in a comprehensive email, I think I'm going to have everything covered. But I'm driving to the grocery store later that night and I realize, oh my goodness, I forgot, or whatever it might be. The other thing I want to mention is I'm not giving you a free Friday. That 15 hours is not coming in a big block of time. The NSF studies, the educational psych studies are completely 100% aligned. The most efficient and productive scholars and writers are those who are working in 20 and 40-minute increments. It does not mean that you should not plan your week to have longer periods of time to research and read and write. But you need to take advantage of those smaller periods of time and think of it as exercise. When I was in grad school at Wisconsin, it's not known for the warmest of winters, but I was running long distance. So if it was 5 below zero and it could be 3 weeks of temperatures not getting over 10 degrees, did I say I'm not going out to run? No. I took advantage of those small increments of time because I had to stay in shape in order to run the long distance races that I was engaged in. So I found that when I started out, I could maybe run 1.5 miles in 20 minutes. 3 months later, I was doubling my output. You will find really great efficiencies of time and get more out of it, which brings me to another point in terms of sort of 2 writing techniques. And then I'll pause and take some more questions. When, you don't get it here, but when other parts of the nation get a blizzard, the street department is not worried about the sidewalk. They're worried about getting one lane open for emergency vehicles to get through. And then they worry about the 2 lanes, and eventually they get to the small ancillary streets and sidewalks. So how many of you have had experience in doing a blue book exercise, an examination book, or is that, am I back? Well, in the old days, I guess I'm in the old days now, when we would go into an examination, nothing was on a computer. It was all done by hand. Multiple choice was checked off the same way. But you would have, I was in the humanities and social sciences, so most of my exams required essays. So in a 2-hour exam, you might have 5 questions and you choose 3. You have about 45 minutes to get in and get out and go. So when you do have these increments of time, 45, 60 minutes of time, the last thing you want to be burdened by is perfectionism. You don't want to be worried about the details. That is not the time to polish the stone. That is the time to get as far down the road on the computer as you can in writing. That may mean a paragraph, that may mean a page. But this is the beauty of the technology, especially for those of you who are working on dissertations and starting to convert some of this research into journal articles and hopefully for some of you into books. So that when you're going down the road and you're writing, you can say, you don't stop, pull something and bring it in, whether it's an article or whether it's a table from your dissertation or what have you. You just put a note to come back to it. Because when you have those 20-minute increments of time, that's when you can go back and chip away, checking your sources, rewriting your abstract, or looking out the window to plan next week's research agenda. So I talked to you about freeing up about 15 hours a week. This is Monday through Friday. No one should be on email over the weekends unless it's essential. And I'll get back to work-life balance in a minute. You'll be able to generate about 10 productive hours out of that 15. Okay, I said I wasn't giving you a free Friday, but you're on a semester, right? 16 weeks. The last I heard, 16 times 10 is 160 free hours you have just been given by waiting to hit send on your email. What can you do in 160 hours? Well, I know for a fact, because the faculty here tell me, and the faculty at UConn and other universities tell me, they got another article written. They got a book chapter written. They got a grant application. Your choice, email or production. Okay? Really important tip to consider. Find your own metaphor for working, whether it's exercise or what have you. And the other thing is, it's not all about work. It's about enjoyment and fun as well. So the minute it starts to feel like work, it's time out. Maybe that means you splurge and get a larger special coffee on Friday afternoon rather than the inexpensive cup of coffee. Or I've had more faculty, I've lost track. I took my dog for a walk. I saw my daughter play soccer for the first time in 3 weeks. Anyway, even at that, it's still going to be a long work week, okay? I wanted to also, before I open it back up for questions, I wanted to give you a sense of how the work environment has changed, because I'm not saying we want to go back or can ever go back to the days of wine and roses when we only had phones and emails, because it was still the same kind of pressure for productivity. But let me tell you this, I was not alone. We went to work at 8:30 in the morning and we left at 5, and we did no work until 8:30 the next morning. We left on Friday at 5, we got back to work at 8:30 on Monday, and we did no work over the weekend except, in my case, to prepare for or to follow up conventions, where I might be reading materials in advance of meeting with authors at a conference, or coming back. I was lucky because I had great mentors at Hopkins, and the director in my world would be the equivalent of a Bear Bryant in the football world. He never allowed us to do expense reports on company time. That was the one thing he wouldn't allow. So, but what I'm saying is, it was a 40 to 50 hour work week. We had our weekends free. We had our evenings free. I do as many books today as I did then, but I work 60-hour weeks, even listening to myself talk to you all. That's the different work environment. So work-life balance is really, really important, and you will find ways to be efficient and to take care of yourselves, because the other thing that's so fascinating, or one of the things that was so fascinating in those NSF week-long workshops, and they were all day, they were exhausting, is in self-evaluation. These were newly minted PhDs, just coming in, just got their first job for the most part. Of the 20 factors that were important, work-life balance always was at the bottom. Always at the bottom. So we are all aware of burnout and exhaustion. So again, try to find your own compromise with the world as we are. We're starting to see some pivot back to what I would call a more civilized environment. but you can take advantage of it. And the other thing is, we know we're going to be better writers, better researchers when we're not exhausted. When we're not exhausted in that regard. Okay. Any questions right now? Again, we covered a lot of topics as it relates to your own particular work. Then I'm going to get back to Dr. Bacani's query about the relationship of journals in the various departments and initiatives there. Okay. For you all, the number one, if I were advising you, as I am some on these one-on-one, the most important thing for me is to build your resume now. So that when you come out with your PhD, you can compete against the hundreds of others who are looking for the same job as you are. So that's why I was talking about trying to be as efficient as you can in time management and technique and navigation on making sure that you can get as many articles out as efficiently as possible and not lose time. When it comes down to it, and there are chairs in the room who can provide their own observations, when faculty are brought to campus to interview on the short list, and everyone is of equal, it's usually the publishing record that's going to take precedence and or grants, depending on the field. So it's really important for you to build your resume in legitimate ways as best you can. So that's why I was saying a book review counts in that regard, though for tenure it would have no bearing unless it was an invitation. So the goal of the research is to get the information out, to disseminate knowledge as worldwide as we can. So that's pretty straightforward, and hopefully you will be able to get out one or more articles with your name assigned to them so that regardless of whether you're going into the academy or private industry or business, that's what they're looking to, because that shows competence. These are peer-reviewed journals, and so essentially that's what it can come down to. Now, as you are thinking ahead, let me just do that. How many of you at the moment think you would like to pursue an academic career, just even if it's, we're not mixing wet cement here? Okay. Remember that the PhD is, despite how important it is, it's still an academic exercise. You do want to get in and out as quickly as you can to move forward, but it doesn't end. It's a perpetual learning curve. The expectations for productivity do not end with tenure. I don't know of any university or private college in the United States who do not now require expectations for associate professors within the same 5 to 7 year time frame as it's not gravy train, it's ongoing. Because as we know, I call them bean counters, the algorithms are out of control throughout the United States. And I'm on campuses all over, as I say, and I don't know what it is, but all the administrators are drinking the same Kool-Aid. So what's happening here is reflective of what's happening elsewhere. But so you need to be thinking always about what is the next research project. So even if you are able to, quote, mine your dissertation in your first year, second year, third year as an assistant, if you are not prepared to keep generating the productivity that your department requires, and of course it varies, you're going to be left behind. In the book world, the journal article is also important in establishing your career early on, because the department chairs are assessing the productivity of their faculty for the benefit of the respective deans, and numbers count. And even the most brilliant dissertation that is conceived of converting into a book, it'd be very likely a minimum of 3 years before you're going to see it accepted for publication. You can't wait for that. So even those who are in those book worlds need to be thinking about 2 articles, 3 articles, plus a book. And think of it this way. The articles can serve to establish intellectual territory. There are new ideas that you've investigated and discovered, new results. And the article allows you to establish that information quickly. Those journals are also being read by editors at publishers who are looking for topics, just like they're looking at conferences and getting a sense of what your topic might be and then doing inquiries on that regard. And it also can serve as a writing sample for the evolution and eventual publication of a book. But you also want to be cognizant that there's a point at which you publish too much of what's contained in a book. The publisher may say that there's not enough new information because it's previously available. And I want to get into open access here in a minute because that is impacting your all's lives, I'm sure, directly even now. And universities are trying to wrestle with this at every level. So it's not either or, it's both. Now, I like to use metaphors. It's just I think visually. There's a new faculty member in gender and race studies, and I met her for the first time last month, and she says, "Well, I'm kind of weird because I don't think visually." So she's sort of establishing her own kind of methodology because most of us are visualizing what we're writing. Nonetheless, if a book is a house, an article is a room or a cabin, but it still has the same kind of integrity that a house does. And the one thing that's missing from too many scholarly articles, and again, I'm not here to change the system, and one has to be cognizant of what is acceptable in one's field. But I come back to my earlier point about faculty when I read these articles, and so much is left out and assumed. Even the most technical endeavor, you still need to be telling a story, whatever that might mean. And there are mechanisms by which you can convey a story without getting into trouble by veering too far afield from what's already being published. The notes, the use of explanatory notes, even in disciplines for which the author date system is required, allows for those kind of opportunities. A couple of examples. Again, I'm going to use faculty examples, but it's easy for you to understand this. The university recently hired, a few years ago, one of the nation's foremost experts in IT. She had the highest of security because the IT work she was involved with in the corporate world dealt with national security issues. She finally got tired of that environment and came back, wanted to come back to the university. And the university was actually fortunate to hire her because she could have gone anywhere. She wanted to come here. And of course, every department and every dean wants to use her expertise. But anyway, so when I was having a one-on-one discussion with her about her work, I said, "Who are your enemies?" And I use that word deliberately because, as we know, even from reading the newspapers and watching public media, not all research is pure. Funding sources oftentimes have expectations for results. It's not always clean and clear. That may be product development, but there are certain foundations tend to be libertarian in their views, that if they don't get the results they want, the funding is withdrawn. Anyway, so she said, well, the Marxists hate me. I said, get them in your inner circle. Okay, what does that mean? This comes back now to the journal world and navigating. You have the great good fortune of having perhaps done graduate work elsewhere before you came here, or your master's and your PhD work has all been done here. You can't get a better faculty than exists here. It's real. It's always been good. The reputation of the university has grown, but the strengths have always been here. It's just bigger. So they are providing guidance. But just as I was suggesting that you write and become conversant with editors, even if it's just a formal professional relationship, start to do the same with those who are not here. Bring them into your inner circle, especially as the world, the academic world, becomes more integrated. So even 7 years ago, in the same building on campus, departments weren't even talking to one another, even though they were dealing with similar research questions. Now, they're having writing groups and they're having weekly colloquiums, and because of the integration. So there are experts elsewhere, and similarly you're going, well, why would they pay any attention to me? Well, the young scholars tend to be more territorial, and again, there are exceptions to everything I say, but the senior scholars tend to want to embrace your work. They want to get to know you at a conference, or they may occasionally want to have interaction. So I would suggest that you start thinking about who on the outside might be able to serve you now or in the near future to advise you, because I'm going to say, with rare exception, nothing that you send out should ever go out without having been vetted beforehand. Now that's old-fashioned collegiality, but it's harder to undertake in today's world because it's the digital age and time is of the essence. So this is going to take a few minutes. I hope you'll let me follow through. So let's just say that there's someone at MIT in computer science who is sort of renowned, and perhaps your mentor studied under her or him in Cambridge, and you already have that kind of connection. But they offer something that you're not getting here for whatever reason. To be able to converse with them, to share an abstract, or to engage in a research question or a puzzle or whatever it might be, allows you then to interact with those outside, because who knows, they may be the one who hire you. But the intent is to make sure that all journal articles, all research reports, all book proposals, all abstracts are vetted before they go out. So it's not unlike what I was saying about length of articles and variations thereof, or you're getting conflicting advice or universal advice and you either refrain from revising or you revise and you let them know. When you are able to go forward to a journal editor, you can then say that I have taken advantage, and professors A, B, and C have read my article, and I have responded in kind or not to those suggestions. Sure, it's name dropping, and it precludes them from being peer reviewers because they are no longer independent. But look at the advice you're getting. They're going to be advising you in ways that you may not be known. Let me go into the social sciences and the humanities. You know, anthropology and sociology are talking to each other again. Psychology and sociology are talking to each other again. American studies and history, political science, even the law school, you're starting to see more integration and overlapping. So even if your major, say, is in history, and you're writing an article about whatever, but it has a strong geographical component, for example, I would be getting a geographer, a historical geographer online, because at the very least, they will provide you with key secondary and primary sources that may not yet exist in your literature. You don't know if they're gonna, the journal editor is gonna get someone from geography. Coming back to this woman here in IT, she brought a Marxist on to reevaluate all of her work, knowing that her conclusions would not be favorably endorsed by the Marxists. But the Marxists were providing the equivalent of a devil's advocate, questioning the interpretations of materials. But more importantly, in her articles, using the note system, she is saying essentially, not everyone agrees with my analysis. For a different view, see David Harvey's work on Paris. Similarly, when you're dealing with anthropological versus sociological theory, there may be elements of sociological theory for which you do not have the luxury of spending 6 months reading in a library to become well versed in it, but lacking that may put you in a higher risk for the kind of revisions that would come back. Having someone in your inner circle tend to that will mitigate some of those issues. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? It's old-fashioned navigation. It's selfless, but it's also selfish in order to layer, and layer is so important. So let me, for a moment, talk a little bit about the book world. The journal world is relatively the same with the exception of open access, and that's evolving, and there's not one issue, and this is also true of opening up dissertations and embargoes and all the like. I will simply say this: if anyone asks you for money, stop and consult with your chair and or mentors, because increasingly, I will be shocked if in 20 years there's any printed journals in the world. I just don't see that happening. I don't think there will be printed editions except for those that require good illustrations, but even then, maybe not. Anyway, everything has to be peer reviewed. Some journals are putting accepted journals online until a printed version comes out, then it comes off. Others are all electronic. But I know of more than a few faculty, assistant professors, not here, so I'll exclude Alabama, this was elsewhere, where they went up for tenure thinking they had 12 great articles. They paid for all of them and they counted 0. They were open access journals, but they were all profit. And he spent like $18,000 to have those articles in. Now, there are occasions, and I am aware of them, in which in order for an article to be disseminated more widely, you do need to contribute, or your department has to make it possible for that article to appear in certain venues. That's somewhat different. But as I'll say again, anyone asks you for money, time out, check it out, make sure it's peer reviewed and it's going to count. Okay, but in the book world, I was recently at the University of Baltimore, which is an inner city campus, and I've been there about 7 years. It's about 85% African American enrollment. It's a renaissance area in Baltimore. It's a fabulous campus, all undergraduate for the most part. But of all of the locations that I am aware of, they are at the cutting edge of what's happening in terms of libraries. So let me pause for a minute and give you this. When I go to a campus, usually the dean or the provost with whom I'm working will arrange for me to have dinner on my first visit with the head of the research library, which is fabulous, you know, that's really great. Well, following the Great Recession, when everything was topsy-turvy, I started to do, I guess I had enough of an N factor to write an article, but after a while I cut it. So I was talking to heads of foundations. I was talking to directors of presses, directors of marketing, heads of journals, et cetera, and getting a sense of what was going on. So I also then started to talk to the librarians. So we would have dinner. And again, you just go through the 3-meal course. So in salad, we're getting to get to know each other. And then our meal is about to be served. And I say, hey, can I play a game? And you know, games are one of the great ways of learning. Sure, let's play a game. So I said, I have in my wallet a check made out to the University of, and it has $100,000, but I don't know what to put in the memo line. Okay, you know this isn't real money, right? Okay. And I say, before I write in the memo line, what would you use it for? 8 out of 10 of the librarians said, is that for 1 year or 5? I immediately knew libraries do not have money. They are underfunded. So I said, okay, it's a 5-year commitment, $100,000 a year. How would you spend the money? Well, it's really great. Usually they'll say, well, we serve more people, more students and faculty through journals, and journals are extremely expensive. We would continue to expand our electronic journal program. Great. All libraries on campus have fabulous collections. We would be able to hire 1-3 interns to help digitize some of those collections so that people don't have to travel to Tuscaloosa or Paris in order to look at these materials. What's happened here, of course, you have junior high school students coming into one of the annexes to look at the civil rights history of Tuscaloosa now because this material is available. Okay, that was never the case beforehand. And then more often than not, they would use up to half to reconfigure the architectural space of the existing library, even if that library was 30 years ago state of the art. Because what has happened is the mission of the libraries have changed from repositories of collections and books to learning centers. So this is all fabulous, but we're almost through dessert. And I finally say, what about books? Well, we'll still honor faculty requests, and we still have a few areas in our collection that we will continue to acquire to remain current. Books aren't even on their radar screen. So what does that mean for my world? But this is the world that you're inheriting. Libraries are our coal mines. To the point. When I started at Hopkins in '84, and this would have been true up through the early 2000s, and editors present materials to an internal committee of the director and all of the department managers. Just for your, no one is reading your manuscript but your editor. So the editor is responsible for presenting a summary of your project, which is reflected, for example, on book proposals. The equivalent of a page description, like a jacket copy, and a table of contents, a small writing sample, maybe an introduction, or maybe a couple of pages from the chapters, your qualifications, the reader's reports and their qualifications, and your response to the suggested revisions, and then, importantly, a budget for the book. Because even as my world is university press publishing, you still have to break even. My books historically have sold about 40% to the general public simply because of the topics, even though they're scholarly books. It's always been that way, and it's it's true to this day. It's just the nature of my work. It's place-based work. And I could reliably put 300 to 500 library sales as part of my budget. So my print runs at Hopkins, and I've had now 15 book series, and this was true even with my series at Chicago. 300 to 500 copies. My print runs were anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500, which back then was a lot of copies. Average library sales today, 75. My mentor at Hopkins and the director, Jack Gilner, whom I said, when they started at Chicago in the 60s, every book that Hopkins, Cornell, Yale, Chicago, and many other university presses published, standing orders for 3,000 to 4,000 copies, and these were unrevised dissertations. There was no need for money. There was no need for marketing. You could sell one more copy to your parents, and you'd still be home free. So we've gone from 3,000 to 4,000 to 75. So those sales aren't coming back, despite what a politician may want you to believe. So what do? You have to make sure that your research topic is going to sell 800 copies. Because the academic market has remained stable and in some cases gone up a little bit for the reasons I was mentioning earlier, the integration of overlapping of fields. So that's the case. But if you are doing a research project with the intent of going into the academy in a discipline in which the book is paramount, and on this campus that would be history, American studies, English, gender and race relations, all, you name it, the book is how you get tenure. If you have a topic that's only going to sell 300 or 400 copies, you're dead. Because I know for a fact, I don't have the statistics and I'm not sure they'll be public, I would say right now 20 to 25% of all decisions at the university press level now are based on market. We love the research. We have 3 fabulous peer reviews from 5-star academics, but we're only going to sell 500 copies. So it's dead unless you can bring in the money to help offset the 200 or 300 copies that we can't sell normally to libraries. So for those of you, it's not to scare those of you who are in the book world, but there are techniques even now for you to start thinking about layering so that you can pick up another 50 or 100 academic sales in a related field without reworking the wheel along the lines that I was talking about earlier. And if you're almost to graduate, and that's impossible, and I don't want to contradict myself that the goal is for you to get out of here, you can already start thinking about the mechanisms by which you might move forward. And I'm going to give you an example of someone here, a faculty member here, who came in with a fabulous dissertation on the importance of women missionaries in Indonesia in helping to establish a culture of higher education. And a fabulous topic, but it was really, really narrow. And I actually said to her, my first meeting, I said, I've got to tell you right now, you've got to do something for this to have some market, because I see 300 copies. But she couldn't go back to Manila for the 4 years it took her to do the archival research. That was impossible. So we had a game plan. She doubled the length of her introduction to make it comparative, so that Indonesia, the work that she was doing in Indonesia then became a relevant case studies in a way it previously hadn't, so that it wouldn't matter if you were then going to Kenya or you were going to Colombia, because the same kind of philanthropic, in some cases misguided philanthropic enterprises were being done elsewhere. And then, using the inner circle, she got other scholars engaged in topics elsewhere to provide information, so that within each of those chapters, she was able to refer to other case studies. She got a contract 6 months ago with Cambridge. So I'm just saying, you just need to be aware of my world because you are in it. Okay? All right. It's 2:30, and we have a half an hour, and there's more that I can convey, but it feels as if I really would love to hear from what you all are encountering and questions that you may have. Anyone with any more questions right now? Okay. How many of you find writing easy? Well, that's good. That's good. Writing, like anything, is an art form. But there are a couple of other techniques that I might suggest to you that seem to work. Again, you would know best. What I'm seeing more on this campus than I'm perhaps seeing at other campuses, and again, this is faculty related, so I'm not aware of what's happening in the grad school, but I'm hoping that it is happening or might become more common. The old-fashioned writing group is getting a lot of positive feedback. And what do I mean by that? It means that those who are in kindred spirit disciplines, even if it's the laboratory, are getting together regularly, some every 2 weeks, some monthly. And everyone is taking turns, and literally everyone at the round table is reading writing samples as if this is a large inner circle, and getting the kind of feedback at the front end before journal articles or book chapters or book proposals are going out. So that is one technique that we're finding is working at the faculty level. That may be working well for you. And it's really great because they almost always do it over food. And there's no better way of getting ideas across and getting a positive environment than over food, even if it means, in this case, brown bagging it and that sort of thing. Another technique that I find extremely valuable, and this will be true of you who are also teaching, is to read in front of a mirror. Read aloud in front of a mirror. More often than not, when you start to read, you yourself will be your best critic, because you'll realize that's a run-on sentence. I need some periods here. Or I'm starting to drift. Or I am getting unfocused. I'm starting to slide away. I'm trying to bring everything that I know about my dissertation into the topic. Remember, the great writer John McPhee said the key success to writing is what you don't include. So that's another technique, is to read aloud. The other thing, how many of you are teaching in the classroom? How many of you have had any instruction on what it's like to perform? You know, I was apologizing for my performance because I don't do this very often. I hesitate to go back and see how many sentences I didn't complete. But how many of you have had any instruction on on just presenting materials? A few? Good. Well, as part of that NSF AAG scenario, one of the last sessions we had, it was usually on the Thursday of the week. We come in on a Saturday and leave on a Saturday, and there would often be a field trip because they were in great locations. We were in Boulder for 3 years, and then we were in Yukon for the other 2. Anyway, there were 3-minute videotaped of your presentation. And here was the task, and this is something you can do with friends, just among yourselves. It doesn't matter when in the semester you would want to present your 3 minutes. And it was literally 3 minutes. It was a stopwatch. For one thing, we had 30 faculty members to get through, and it took all day and all night to get it done. So it can be the introduction, you're talking about the syllabus. It could be one concept that you're trying to get across. It could be about the safety features of directing, of lighting a backstage theater. Anyway, the tape rolls and you start, and at 3 minutes you stop and you look at it. So you'll learn things that, for example, as Nick Saban used to do, but doesn't do so much, he's always talking with his hands in front of his face, you know. And my first week at Hopkins, my mentor, the late Henry Thompson, said, "Sit on your damn hands." Or you'll realize that your voice inflection is dropping off, can't hear, or you're not interacting well with students. It's mind-boggling what you'll learn by doing some of that if you haven't done it. So you can try that. Similarly, in reading aloud, in the world of literature and creative writing, of course, reading is an art form. I mean, that's part of the tenure package. Am I reading to the Alabama Writers Forum in Montgomery or whatever it might be? But you will hear your language stumble, or you'll realize whatever it might be. So those are two other techniques that I would use. And I'm trying to suggest, are you all reading it to people who are unfamiliar with your fields at all, or are you staying within your inner, your discipline? That's where that writing group is so helpful sometimes, because you're going to get different perspectives, and they're going to ask you questions. Well, what does that mean where it's assumed? Okay. There's one other thing that I would like to mention on writing, and I say this more to faculty. And this is a complaint, and there's nothing we can do about it. The problem with the academic world is that you all are only talking to yourselves for the most part. Now that, to be sure, the way it is. I mean, the research is high-end. The referees for expertise demand that kind of knowledge. But especially, well, maybe even now, remember what it was like when you were an undergraduate thinking about majoring in chemistry or biology or history or social work or what have you, or even in your master's level. Remember what you didn't know. Remember the questions that you had that now are self-evident. Because if you can remember who you were even a few years ago, and remember that person as you are writing for your peers today, you have expanded your audience significantly, especially in the book world, but not exclusively in the book world. So coming back to this idea, I had to ask these authors repeatedly, what do you mean by this term? It's not well known to me. In my world, ecology means this. In your world, it means that. But I would be interested in reading this article, or whatever the example might be. And it doesn't mean that you're dumbing down anything, but it does allow you to make contact with that inner self of you, because you're then talking to the grad students. And the grad students are the ones who are going to be reading your article in journal form. They're also going to be the ones who are reading the book. So I've been lucky enough to been an author and editor of 7 books now, and my last one won a big book prize in 16, but it was supported with heavy money. It's the title of the book is Nature in Cities. It's the ecological imperative of design and planning, because it's landscape designers that are transforming our world cities. And so we had more than $100,000 to support the endeavor, which is, really great. But it allowed us to do an international symposium at the University of Texas, Austin, so that people from around the world could come to hear leaders around the world who are redesigning the world's cities, from China to Toronto to the High Line in New York, and what they have to say. And I've learned, because I've done 3 edited books, I've learned that you don't have these people just wing it and give a paper, that we required that they would write their chapter in advance and then they would give an abridged presentation. And this conference, there was limited seating at the AT&T Convention Center there on the Austin campus. So, but I would say at least half were coming from the graduate school population in Austin. And so we did feedback on all of the presentations, and obviously there are going to be favorites and not, but that wasn't the point. But consistently from the graduate students, they wanted definitions of terms. They were wrestling with it. Their speakers had assumed all of this knowledge, but the graduate students were unclear about the roots of words such as ecological design, ecological restoration, and so forth. So it goes back to the point. I completely rewrote every essay. It took me a full year. But I was thinking about you. And I think that's why we won the prize, because it was no longer the designers talking to themselves. And now that book is being used in municipalities around the world in order to convey information. So I just wanted to give you that sense that it's okay. Now, some journal articles don't want anything to do with that kind of storytelling or massaging, and that's where, there are going to be limits to this opportunity. But whenever you can, think of it. And then likewise, something that I ask all faculty members to do, and perhaps even you all are in a position to do this now, is I say go public once or twice a year. And what do I mean by going public? Well, the easiest way to go public is to write a letter to the editor. Okay, now, some letters to the editor have, again, just like journals, have requirements, maximum of 150 words, others 300 words. I just wrote one for the Washington Post, and it was a 200 word, and they said that it had to apply toward an article that had been covered by the Post, that the chances of being published under that scenario were greater than if you just did something off topic. Okay. That is a hugely helpful exercise for you in this way. What is the equivalent of 150 or 250 word summary? An abstract. An abstract. In an abstract, are you telling the whole story? No, you're setting the table. So likewise, and again, the way these letters to the editors are done online now, the word, you have 132, you have 32 words, and I'm always, when I get down to like 3 or 4 words, I go, I have 20 more words that I need to get in. I have to go back and edit and clean it up. It's polishing the stone. So that's a very good exercise in learning how to write, but more importantly, it's to convey information, convey information to the public that would benefit them. This is not a political exercise. This is not to say that we are misguided in this policy or that. It's usually a topic that warrants your expertise in some way, to either say, well, let's just see, what would be well, for example, the bail system in Tuscaloosa is very unique. And a lot of scholars now in the Department of Criminal Justice are finding through their research, discriminatory policies as it relates to who gets bail and who doesn't. So if the Tuscaloosa News reports an incident or something in which the information may be only limited, you could come in and say, it's great that Tuscaloosa paper is covering this, but the big issue is not that, it's this. Or to encourage, say, for those of you who may be in the School of Education, and it's not only in the secondary schools, but the universities are now finding teaching the test is leading to better grades. So you're having fewer student complaints now with grade inflation. Grade inflation is an issue everywhere. So there would be another opportunity to say, it's fabulous that the school board has been moving in one direction or another. This is reinforced by 20 years of research or something. And it's not to show off your intellect, but it's to engage the public. So it doesn't happen often, but Kathy's heard this story before. I was working again in this NSF seminar with an assistant professor of geological sciences at the University of Kentucky, and from China. And so English was a very difficult second language. But we all know about the impact of climate change. And in Kentucky, like so many other places, we are finding that species, top to bottom, are blooming 2 to 3 weeks earlier than historically would be the case. But there was one exception to the rule, and it was the common white ash, of which baseball bats have been made. Of course, we now have the ash borer, so we're worried about that. But anyway, and I just said, the public would love to know why. Everyone was sort of saying on the street, why is the white ash retarded by 3 weeks? And I forget his answer, I'm sorry, I apologize, I lost track of the science. But I said, that's a really great topic. So, and the Louisville Courier-Times and the Lexington papers are well renowned in the world of journalism. So a science editor, I said, contact the science editor and have them talk about your research. Well, the circulation of those papers is about 100,000. The head of a foundation read that story and got in touch with the scientists, and that led to a major grant. One of the great burdens of administrators here and elsewhere is going to Montgomery or Annapolis or Columbia and talking to the legislature to get funding. When the legislatures can see the research and the knowledge that's emerging from the institutions, and you're starting to get bridges between town and gown to whatever extent that's possible, it makes it easier for them to say this is not an ivory tower or in that regard. It has impact in that regard. The other thing it does, the other aspect of going public is to take advantages of opportunities to do speaking, whatever that might mean. Now, in the sciences, that may be more difficult, and I know time is of the essence, and that's why I suggest once or twice a year so that it's not a burden. But just think about how many kids in the STEM programs in Tuscaloosa's public schools would benefit from knowing what it's like to run a research lab here at the university, and the knowledge that's based, or the products that are developed from that. And again, it's just more experience in being able to work that out. And as you are resume building, those things matter. It's not the equivalent of a journal article, but it is professional service. And as one is an assistant professor, reaching out to serve as a peer reviewer, to say that I was a peer reviewer for these flagship journals or these flagship university presses, or by invitation spoke to the Tuscaloosa High School or whatever it might be, matters. It goes toward professional service, and it's not just serving the department at hand. Yeah. The last thing that I would like to mention is to come back to this, the opportunities that are going to arise and have already arisen by libraries becoming learning centers. So I want to do the yin-yang side of the positive effect, and this is where publishers are way behind, through no fault of their own. We've already talked about how some journal articles are going online immediately or exclusively. But so often the data, whether it's tabular, charts, or in the humanities illustration, they can only reproduce so many, but there's all this other information. Increasingly, journals are providing links to that other material. So be aware of those kinds of opportunities, because there may be a day or a year soon where there'll be a video of you in the lab as it relates to your research article. Or, for example, for those in the humanities for which the illustration is archival, not atmospheric. And there's a faculty member here, she's on fellowship at Crystal Bridges and then goes to Yale in the spring, but she's dealing with antebellum slavery, photographs of slavery. And it's not the photographs that we're familiar with. She's unearthing amazing new archival material. The article that she wants to write, they're going to restrict how many pictures they can reproduce because of length. But they're going to allow her to have a link so that she can create a virtual gallery of the other material that could not make it in to the article, so that the article is enriched that much further. We really don't know what opportunities arise, but this is also true in the book world. So what I'm saying is, be mindful of possibilities as to what this data that you're working on might be available in these various ways. So I'll give you an example. Are all of you familiar, at least by the headlines, with Bears Ears National Monument in Utah? Do you know that story? For those who don't, one of the last things that President Obama did, as most presidents do, is establish national monuments, which is a presidential prerogative, does not require an act of Congress. And for the first time in American history, and I'll use the word Native American, even as indigenous people don't like that word, but it solves a lot of problems for me. But there were 25 tribes in the desert southwest of primarily Utah and Arizona, who have been living in that part of America for more than 7,000 years. So this is sacred ground. And the National Park Service, Department of Natural Resources in Utah, they have identified a minimum of 125,000 sacred sites. Now, don't diminish this idea of a sacred site. Imagine 125,000 churches in this same region to get some sense of a parallel for our world. And these are would be architecturally significant churches. So these 25 tribes, all of which for 7,000 years have been historically at odds with one another, came together to establish a coalition to save, they were proposing 2 million acres to save a portion of the most threatened sites. Okay, so Bears Ears was something that came from the ground up. But it's also in a state known for its conservative politics, in which the Mormon population is the dominant population, and they left persecution, as we know, as they came from New York and Illinois and ended up in Salt Lake and then established communities. So it's 80% Mormon in terms of its white population, and they see this as sacred ground. That's 200 years of sacred ground and 7,000 years, and both see it as sacred ground, but both see the management of it in different ways. So the Utah, and again, it's one particular party, and this is not a political speech, it doesn't matter, but they said 2 million acres is too much. We want 900,000 acres. So as Obama did in almost everything in his presidency, he cut it right down the middle. It's why he was the editor at the Harvard Law Review. Everyone said he was the middle guy. I'm sorry, but in perspective, everything you'll see, he was a middle ground. Obamacare was a compromise. Everything, but for the first time, the tribes were to manage the national monument. Trump reduced that to 220,000 acres. 700,000 acres more than the Republicans even wanted. So it's in the courts now. All right. So my publishing firm is developing the first 2 books on it. One is on the photography, and the other are on the profiles of the players. So the book, we're publishing the historical book with Arizona, and yet there's all this other archival material. So we have the council meetings. We have 25 chiefs drumming, praying to the Creator for President Obama to create a national monument. We have interviews of Mormon ranchers in tears of their love of this place. We have the community meetings. None of that can go into a book. But Arizona was looking for a prototype for what we would be calling an interactive electronic book, so that as one is reading the history of this site, you can click and hear the drumming, just as you in the classroom may be taking time out in your PowerPoint presentations to show Martin Luther King Jr. on the Washington Mall delivering his address, or whatever else might be. So you in the classroom are already doing what the libraries want. So coming back to my dinner conversation when I said, what about books? But then I tell them about this story in the interactive book. They were saying, quit your day job, do that, because that's what we need. We need the interactive book because that's what the students want. So coming back to the University of Baltimore, they had a brand new library built 25 years ago. It was state of the art, 5 floors, all stacks. When I was there last month, they had just gone through complete renovation. It's now a LEED qualified building. It's not platinum. The law school building is platinum, but they had the same architect come in. So it's a really dynamic architectural facade. You go into the library now, and it's not unlike what you see in Gorgas. It's all computer terminals and group terminals here because classes are coming in. That's how they're learning, or study groups are coming in. There's only 1 floor of the 5 devoted to books. So, okay, I lament that because the University of Baltimore Library is not going to be buying many books. And, but the point of it is, 4 floors now are for what we're not doing. So there are going to be opportunities for you to pioneer this kind of ground, to be alert to it, to take advantage of using the electronic world to get the information out, not just in the journal world, but in the book world. We're not sure where it is. University, it's very expensive for any kind of product development, but just to be aware of it and to be thinking about your research and writing in ways that you're already doing in the classroom. Okay? So I hope that if not this week with the 3 open sessions tomorrow and Wednesday, when I come back, hopefully in February, that I'll be able to talk to you one-on-one, because we literally just focus on you, what you're doing, what you're writing, what your goals are, resume building, and all of the rest. I'm like a resident physician coming into the third world. And that's what it's like, so that I get to know you more intimately and hopefully advise you in ways that would be helpful. And I appreciate you all coming, and thanks for giving me the chance to share some thoughts. And again, it's great to be back on campus.
Let me ask you one question before we close.
Yeah.
When students meet with you, it's the question I get, what sort of thing should they bring with them?
Well, perhaps it's a little bit harder for you all, but if you have composed a resume, your CV, even if it's out of date, you can bring it, because I would be commenting on how you would want to revise that for your grant writing and or your publishing scenario. If you have an outline for an article or an abstract for an article or a tentative article, it may seem rude, but I can flip through it in 3 minutes and know what's going on. If you're working on a dissertation, you can bring in your table of contents or your introduction and we'll walk through it. So whatever materials you want. I don't need much because I've been doing this for so long, and it's not to be disrespectful, but I can get a sense. That's what I was doing with the faculty on these articles. And then I kept saying, that's why I kept asking all those questions. You're telling me what the article's about, but it's not in writing. There's a disconnect. It's in your head. That's why, so one last thing. I would suggest you write more than you need. It's a little bit easier to trim than it is to expand. But layer, whatever that might mean. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.